Alright, and today I'm gonna be making an item ranking for Rell. Rell support, of course, and I'm back here on Tier Maker just so it's easier to visualize the whole thing, and I can go through all the items one by one easily. So when it comes to the items I included, I for one included all the support items that are in the game, and also some other items which are or used to be played on Rell or built on Rell. So I also included some items that used to be good in the past, but are not really built nowadays, but I still want to talk about the viability of them right now. One item that is not on here because it's not in the list is Echoes of Helia. So I'm just gonna talk about Echoes of Helia right now. So there are a couple of items that require you to shield or heal your ally, which Rell is not capable of doing. Technically she is with the Ruined Font of Life, but I think we can all agree that this doesn't justify putting those items any higher than F, so I'm just gonna start with those for now. Echoes of Helia, I don't have an image for it right here, but it is an F. Then we have Staff of Flowing Water, we have Moonstone, and we have, the last one was Ardent Sensor. So I originally thought these would be fine with New Rell, but then I checked how exactly they are worded, and it turns out it's not buffing your allies, which Rell can pretty consistently do now. It's only healing and shielding, so giving them the speed boost with full tilt does unfortunately not count, which means that these 3 or 4 items with Echoes of Helia are not that viable. I mean, you can still kind of use them with Font of Life, but that's really about it. If you want to try it, sure. It's probably not gonna be terrible because the stats these 4 items grant are actually not that bad for new Rell. For old Rell they were even worse, but old Rell could at least heal. So I think they were bad on Rell before the rework, and they're bad after the rework as well for different reasons, but yeah. But the stats they give are pretty good, I think. They're pretty decent. Okay, but let's continue in order right now. We have the 5, in my opinion, viable boots options. And let's start with Ionian boots. Before the rework, Ionian boots are S tier. Ionian boots Kindle Gem early game was very nice. Back then you maxed Crashdown first, which lowered the cooldown of it, making it really low cooldown even in the early game. So now the cooldown of both Full Tilt and Crashdown don't go down by leveling them up. Which doesn't mean that Ionian boots are any worse on it, but it just feels worse. So you max Full Tilt, but not really because of the cooldown, but because of the movement speed it gives you. Still, Ionian boots gives the ability haste on summoner spells, which of course is still pretty great, and Flash is, even after the rework, very important on Rell. I would say it's a bit less important, since the playstyle changed a bit, and you don't necessarily need to go for these 5-man all-in combos. You can be useful in other ways, which means Flash is not that important, but it's still pretty important, and I would still put Ionians in S tier. Just because Flash is still great on Rell, it got less important with the rework, but it's still important. Okay, then I'm gonna go over both Merc Threads and not Ninja Tabi, that's not the name anymore. I gotta remember that. And Plated Steel Caps. So I think it's pretty obvious when you want to buy each of that. Mercs are great when you play against a lot of CC, and Plated Steel Caps is great when either the enemies are full AD or they have a lot of auto attack reliant champions. Kindred jungle, maybe a ADC in the mid lane, Akshan or something like that, and a normal AD carry, then you definitely want to go for Plated Steel Caps. I think we can put both of them in A. They're both great, but I would even go ahead and argue that if you go Ionian boots, then you just play for one-shotting the enemies or comboing them more frequently, and you don't really need resistances then, right? If you just all in the 380 carries the enemies have and your team one-shots them, who cares about tanking hits from them, because they're dead, right? This might be a bit of bronze mentality, but for Rell it feels right, because all Rell does is engaging. At least before the rework it was like that. I don't think it changed that much after the rework, but yeah, after the rework Ionians got a bit worse, maybe, and these two got a bit better, but nothing significant, I would say. Then we have Mobies and Swifties. So Mobies are an odd one. I think before the rework Mobies would have been easily F tier, but I feel like now with the rework, where you might be able to run around the map unmounted, for those who have seen my last video, know that it's actually not that bad to stay unmounted even if you go for roams, just to have that impactful and non-counterplay mount up flip when you gank an enemy lane. And these can definitely help when roaming, but the thing is, Swifties exist. And let's talk about Swifties. So Swifties is interesting because they reduce slowing. And back in the day, it didn't matter on Rell, because she did self-slow herself, but her movement speed got capped on a certain number of movement speed. Meaning this passive of Swifties, which reduces slows, didn't matter. Now it does matter. So Swifties are pretty decent, and only buying Swifties is already really, really good. Unmounted, you are of course the fastest of all of these in combat. I'm not even sure if Mobies are faster than Swifties. I haven't checked, but I think just because Mobies are Mobies and they don't do anything in combat, I think we can say that Mobies belong in B and we can put Swifties in A, because Swifties are just way more consistent and Mobies are a big gamble. Mobies might be better in like a solo queue scenario, and in every other scenario probably these four are the best options. Okay, next up we have Athena's chains, and I actually looked up what it exactly did, and while looking it up I noticed that it's only 2,500 gold, which seems crazy. So 2,500 gold is the same cost as a Solari, as a Even Shroud, where is it? Even Shroud. And that's not bad, honestly. And chains, of course, it is a situational item. Earlier, before I started the recording, I had a situational tier. But then I was like, okay, if I put in a situational tier, then wow, we have to put mercs in there, we have to put plated sea caps in there, we have to put chains in there, we have to put Mikas in there. But I want to talk about the items just as an item on Rell, and not really if you want to build them just specific to the game you're playing. So I'm gonna talk about like the situations where you would ideally build those items, but I don't want to just smack it into a situational tier and then you guys maybe can't even use that information to determine if you want to use them. So chains is, I think it's a bit underrated on Rell actually. So of course, the main reason you want to build chains is usually when you go for these items like Thornmail, because chains you usually pick it up, then you bind it on the enemy mid laner. Then if the enemy mid laner is solo AP in the most cases, that's usually the common, of course it's not every game, but usually it's mid lane AP and they're solo AP most of the times. And then you just bind them and then you go full armor. And of course you only do that if you go for the full tank build, which is not the best on Rell these days, I think, but you can still do it if you want to. So you chain the enemy AP mid laner and then you build stuff like Thornmail and maybe even another armor heavy item. I think Nightspaw gives a good amount of armor. And yeah, that's pretty much how you use chains, and I think it being 2,500 gold makes it even better, to be honest. Probably not viable first item, but second item it can definitely be decent, and I would say I'm gonna put it in A. If I'm looking only at the effects, I swear I thought it was at least 3k gold. And I was thinking, okay, it's gonna end up in B probably, because it is decent, but it is too expensive. But it's only 2,500. So I want to put it in A, but it's not a just buy it every game item. It's a, okay, it would work really good binding this certain enemy, and then I'm just building resistances against all the other enemies, and that is pretty good. So as an item as a whole, I'm gonna put it in A. Redemption. So, Redemption hasn't changed a lot, but it feels worse on Rell now. I'm still gonna put it confidently in A, because it's just so simple to use. You combo the enemies and then you just use Redemption in the same moment, just on top of you. Probably gonna hit all the enemies, hitting yourself, gonna be really, really good. But I just don't see a good angle for it after the rework. For me, it just doesn't hit the same like it was before the rework. This Rell stun duration has been hotfixed, so it's still the same, so it shouldn't really make a difference. But it feels different. I'm still gonna put it into A, but I myself haven't probably built it a single time since the rework. But it still should be good. I just feel like there are so many other options that are great and outvalue it, and yeah. But I still think it's pretty good. It deserves its spot in A. Maybe because it's two flipping fairy jumps now, so I hate it. All right, Imperial Mandate is actually a pretty decent one. So New Rell is all about movement speed, right? And the thing is, I'm surprised Imperial Mandate is not getting built more. It's probably because of the stats it gives, and it's not really considered a tank item in quotations. But I think that Rell is not a tank anymore, anyways, because she's all about movement speed now, right? She's all about she is very similar to Bard. If I had to make a comparison, I think her playstyle is very similar to Bard now, where you just annoy the enemies with your presence and then go for the catches when you can. So I think Rell is probably gonna shift from Crash Down playstyle to a mount up playstyle. I don't think she is worse at team fighting, but I think she just is able to use her non-counter playable mount up flip more efficiently now, and you should abuse that. I think you should play around it more and more. You should just consider it. I know it's gonna be kind of difficult to adapt to that because Rell was all about Crash Down Magnet Storm before the rework, but I think now we have to utilize mount up flips even more, even in teamfight situations. So, of course, don't get me wrong, Crash Down Magnet Storm is still great and it's still game winning, but I think it's just more consistent and simple to just go for mount up flips from time to time now. So, what Imperial Mandate is great for is that your team can follow up you better. Okay, they have to pop the mark in the first place, but if they do, they get the movement speed and then they can follow up you even better. It also gives a bit more damage to your teammates and to yourself, and I actually like it even more now because yes, it's not the tank item, but it's pretty. But the new Rell doesn't really need tank stats anymore that badly. So I want to put it in A, but just that you know it, it's not the most confident A because I myself haven't tried it a lot. In theory, it should be great, and every time I played it, it has been decent. It has not been like, okay, I built Imperial Mandate, I guess we lose now. It's always been decent, it's had great value, and you just have to look if there's anything better, and there's certainly something better coming up. So, only because it's an A, don't start building it all of a sudden. It's probably gonna be okay, but there are better options, in my opinion, that will come up very soon. Solari definitely is not a better option. I think Solari is terrible. Ever since I found out that it just gives 3 armor and 3 magic resist as its passive effect to your allies, I have not built it a single time. So I want to put it in B just to set a statement, but it is not terrible, okay? It is okay. You can still build it, and it is gonna give you the tanks that somewhat tanks that summon utility that you want, and it's still pretty good into certain champions like Karthus, for example. If the enemies have Karthus, then even I would maybe build Solaris if needed. If the Karthus is a threat, I'm building Solaris. If the Karthus is not a threat, I'm building something else. But it is decent, but I want to put it in D to set a statement so every support Rell player stops building it. It's really not the item a Rell wants. And that's all I'm gonna say to it. Okay, so who has seen my last few videos know that I am a Shurelias gamer now. Rell just feels so good with Shurelias. I've checked various websites. There are some people who build Shurelias, but the majority is still Even Shroud. And I don't blame them for it. Even Shroud is still a super insane item. We will get to it later. But Shurelias, man, it's so good. So I have started playing the flip mount up playstyle recently, and it has been working great. And Shurelias just supports this and complements this playstyle so well. It is so good. I singly played for the active. Honestly, it's great that full tilt gives a bit more movement speed than usual with Shurelias, but that's not the point. Its active is so great. Then also the stats give you good value because you don't even want to be the tank anymore. Not really, at least on support Rell. So you benefit from its stats the same way as you benefit from Imperial Mandate stats very, very well. And that's, I love it. So there's literally, when you are playing a roaming playstyle, which has been improved on since the rework, you can't just walk into the brush unmounted, and then you just mount up full tilt Shurelias the enemy down, and they have no chance to do anything. It's point to click. It's literally the WE combo from before the rework in easy mode. Like, everyone who loved the WE combo because it was so easy to use and the enemies had no counterplay, just do that now. It's even better because the enemies are positioned worse after you flip them, and then you can Q them right after, and it's really good. Very little counterplay. Of course, mobility is pretty good against it, but if you have flash, you can just flash in, cancel a dash, cancel a jump, and the enemies are even worse positioned. So I love Shurelias. It's awesome. It's really good. I'm gonna put it in S, and I'm gonna say it's the best mythic right now, at least for me, and for how I play it. So now we have a historical one. Who remembers the days where I just built Sonya second? Every game Sonya second, because it was just 2,700? 800? Around that. So now it's 3,000. And looking at how much a Seeks cost, or how much a Knight's Vow costs, you just can't spend 3k, bro. Like, it has to go here. It has to. There are for sure situations where I would still build it, or at least consider building it. If you're the solo frontline, it is pretty decent. You just dive in there. So not only if you're the solo frontline, but if you're the solo frontline and your team has to do the engaging, then Sonya's of course is gonna have a shit ton of value. But it's so damn expensive, man. And the components do nothing for you. Like, stopwatch is great, but you can buy stopwatch, but then just don't upgrade it. So stopwatch isn't even the component really. Then Fiendish Codex does nothing for you, and Seeker's Armor Guard does even less for you. Like the 10 or 15 armor you get from it, who cares, bro? Who cares? Nobody. In some way, it is better than building a tank item on New Rell at least. Because I think tank stats on New Rell are kinda bad, but it is still aight. So I am probably never gonna build it, you are probably never gonna build it, but it's still better than all of these because you can't really use them. And that's why it goes in the D tier. Okay, I'm gonna talk about Knight's Vow and Seeks at the same time, because both of these items, if you haven't noticed with the recent changes, both of these are 2,200 gold now. And that's really, really, really good. So actually Knight's Vow, I just didn't have it on my brain. Knight's Vow's ability is pretty good, especially when you're ahead. So for everyone that missed for God knows what reason, that few resistances, attract and repel granted your allies. Go for Nice Vow. It's better in every single stat it has. It makes your teammate tankier. It heals you when your teammate deals damage. So just binding it to a fat ally will do wonders for you. And I think it got pretty viable with it being that cheap. I've built it like 50% of all my games. When you're ahead, you can pick it up, bind it to your fat 80 carry, and then you just yeet into the enemies and have a field day. So for Zeeks, I have built it less. I have always been under the impression that Zeeks is overkill, especially in the even shroud meta. So for me, Zeeks has always been there, but every time I look at Zeeks, I was like, okay, the old Zeeks would have been great on Rell, but the new one? I mean, it makes sense on Rell, but I already have even shroud. If I hit the enemies with my combo, they should die anyways. So do I really need it? So I personally have never bought it, but it being 2,200 gold, I just want to put it in A. It gives 200 gold, 45 armor. It's pretty decent stats. And its ability is definitely useful on Rell. So I have bought it a lot, but I'm gonna put it in A. It's definitely not on the same par as these three. So both these are very cheap, very efficient, and if you can pick them up, if the situation is great, then go for it. It's really good, I think. So I've just noticed while checking the items effects that Radiant Virtue is not in here. So let's take a replacer for Radiant Virtue. What is a great replacer? What are we taking? Let's take Infinity Edge just for the clickbait kappa. Let's talk about Radiant Virtue. So since the time everyone built Radiant Virtue of Rell on Rell, two things have changed. The mechanic behind its active has changed. Back in the day it used to be ability haste, healing, and I think something else. Was it AP? Was it AD? Was it adaptive force maybe? I'm not too sure. And its cost has changed. It went all the way up to 3,200, which made it absolutely unbuyable. But now, with the changes, it's back down to 2,700. Which definitely is appealing for the Rell support gamers. The new effect is not terrible on Rell, but it's definitely worse on her. Especially with the whole mechanic being that you usually crash down Magnet Storm, meaning that your crash down shield doesn't benefit from the active of Radiant Virtue, at least at the first activation. And that of course has changed, but back in the day you at least had the ability as for your teammates, and I think it was adaptive force, I'm not too sure anymore. But Radiant is probably on this tier right now. The Infinity Edge, just putting it in there. Because the other options are just better. I mean, Radiant Virtue now just makes you tanky. The healing, it's nothing really that matters. It's the same with the old Rell Q healing. It was there, it was nice to have, but it doesn't really matter the greater picture. So I'm gonna put it in here. Just because, for one, new Rell doesn't really want to get tanky. New Rell support, let me be specific on that one. New Rell support doesn't really want to be tanky. It's all about annoying the enemies, scaring them, threatening them, and then engaging when they panic and use their abilities. And if you combo them, you don't really need to be tanky, they should be CC'd anyways. And if you miss your combo, you're dead anyways, it doesn't matter how tanky you are. So, Radiant Virtue just used to be really good on Rell, because back in the day you wanted to be a bit more tanky and it gave more utility to your team. Now it doesn't give utility to your team and it makes you tankier, to be fair, as it did before the rework of the item, but now you don't really need the tankiness. That's why I'm gonna put it into B, and I'm just probably never gonna buy it ever again. Especially as long as Shurelias is so great on Rell. Okay, let's talk about the Giga Chat of all support items. The Watchful Wardstone. I love this item. And it's not because it is better than any other items, it's because it's 1100 gold for a complete item that I think upgrades itself. I know you can pay for it, but didn't it upgrade itself at some point? I don't know, but the Warstone itself is pretty great at its own, so if it upgrades itself, it's even better. If you have to pay a bit more, then yeah. The thing is, what I love about this item, when you play support, it doesn't matter if it's Rell or any other support, you usually are at the point where it's just a standoff with the enemy team, no team really gains gold, and you have to use your gold for control wards all the time. Meaning you don't really get a lot of gold. So at some point you recall with 1100 gold, and you can't buy a complete item with it, but you are like, okay, but the game is probably gonna decide with the next fight, with the next 2 fights, and what should you buy? The components are definitely not gonna help you. Any components of any support items are not gonna help you. The 2 options are maybe stopwatch, or you go for the watchful wardstone. And what the watchful wardstone gives you is actually not that bad. And then combined with you having 3 control wards, being 1 more as the enemy, if they don't build it, is pretty good. And also just for free getting your attack damage, bonus health, ability power, and ability haste all buffed by 8%, just for purchasing this cool little item. Dude, I'm taking it. I'm taking it any day of the week. So this is just pure value because it's so cheap and it gives you something that actually matters. So I'm gonna put it in A. I have to. It's great. Third item, you usually get 2 items on support in solo queue. For me, that's probably Shurelia's, Knight's Vow, and then you just chill with these 2 items. You're not really gaining any gold because if you were to win a team fight, it's probably game over. You slide the Watchful Wardstone in there. You got a good item that does good, decent things for you. You can ward better, and that's like your build for the game, for the rest of the game. Zack, zack, zack. And then if you recall again with the same amount of gold, you can even upgrade it forcefully, which makes it even better. But that's usually not the thing. Like, support gaming is literally, you have 2 items and then you have to use your money as well as possible. You get the wardstone, you get a stopwatch. Something that can really make a difference in the next fights or the next standoffs. And that's why I think wardstone is very underutilized and should be built more. Alright, Even Shroud. No unpopular opinions here, it's still S tier. It's still great, it still does its thing. 10% bonus damage on all enemies in an area is just way too good for a champion like Rell to pass up on. And I think I don't really have to explain it. There's a reason this is 90% of all Rell gamers. I don't even know why some even consider Solaris when Solaris is really not that great and Even Shroud is right there to pick you up for you. Defensively it's better, offensively it's better. Like, why is this item better defensively than this item? Because this gives you more stats. I think Solari is like 2% on every legendary and Even Shroud is 5% on every legendary. If I'm not completely wrong, but I think that was it. So it makes it tankier and its passive is way easier to utilize than Solaris. It is way more impactful. Let me repeat it again. 3 armor and 3 magic resist. That's nothing. Clove armor, an item for 150 gold, right? Gives you 15 armor. And this is just so bad. The shield is great. Don't get me wrong. The shield it does things. But I'm not building a mythic item and passing up on Shurelia's or Even Shroud just to like shield a bit. No, that's just not good. So Even Shroud, still awesome item. Nothing changed too much there. Was great before the rework, is still great after the rework. Alright, let's get to the one item that is F tier on probably every support. I don't think it's as bad as the most make it up to be. It's just another anti-heal item. I think of course if you think about what it did before it got nerfed, it is terrible. But it's still the anti-heal item of choice for supports in my opinion, at least for enchanter supports. So it is terrible on Rell for sure, but just to go on a little tangent, I think it's alright to build on stuff like Renata or I don't know, any enchanter support. If your team can't build anti-heal, just get this. It still gives you the great stats for an enchanter support, and it still is anti-heal, and you might be a support who has it a bit harder to apply it, but it still applies it. Like, don't go for Morello just because people say Chemtech Purifier is terrible as an enchanter supportive support. Just go with it. It's alright. It's alright. So, Turbo Chemtank might be odd to find it in here, but there have been times where people wanted to justify building this. And it's still terrible. I'm gonna put it in B straight up. But why would you build this if Shurelias is right there? Like, Turbo Chemtank costs 500 gold more than Shurelias. And the only thing Rell needs from it is the movement speed. So I've said this multiple times this video already, but Rell doesn't need to be tanky anymore. I don't need an item that gives me 500 health and 50 magic resist. If I want a magic resist item, I'm getting Abyssal Mask, which I haven't included, but I'm gonna talk about it when I get thumbnail about all the tank items. I'm gonna talk about them. Don't worry. I know there are some tank items that you might build, and they will still be mentioned. Don't worry. So you have Shurelias, which to be fair gives you less movement speed than Turbo Chemtank, but it's AoE for your team, and also it buffs your full tilt, and also gives you more useful stats for Rell. Then we have Turbo Chemtank, which is more expensive, gives you stats that you don't really need, does make yourself faster, to be fair, and also slows enemies, to be fair. But no, you don't need it. And there's a reason people don't build it. I think it's not a controversial take to say that Turbo Chemtank is better than Rell. Of course, it's not as bad as these, because you get something, and you get nothing from these. Honestly, let's add the C tier. Let's make it blue. I don't know. Let's put this in here because it's really not that great. And it's worse than these, but better than these, because these do literally nothing, and these are useful in like 5% of your games, and this is useful in like 1% of your game. At least compared to Shurelias, when you just can build Shurelias and get more out of it. So yeah, let's leave it in there and keep going. So let's use Thornmail, because Thornmail is probably the tank item that historically got built the most on Rell. There are games, and I completely get that. There are games where you are in there and you feel like, okay, let's get tanky. And then you think about all the tank items, and maybe you build a Frozen Heart. Maybe you build a Randuin's Omen. Maybe you even build a Varmox. And sure, these games do exist, but I don't want to include all of them only because like you build it in 1 out of 50 games. Like all these tank items you build just for pure stats. I could as well be ranking armor and magic resist and health in this tier list. And sure, it's good, it would be B, but yeah, it's you build those for the stats. Frozen Heart is probably the only one where you might think about, okay, the enemies have poor attack speed based champions, let's go Frozen Heart. But in that case, it would be better if the tank in your team gets it. So I'm gonna say it one more time. New Rell doesn't really want to be tanky, doesn't really need to be tanky. Can build her tanky, don't get me wrong, but I think it's not the ideal playstyle. And I just think that all these tank items, if you have any questions about any tank item that I haven't included here, it's B tier for me. For me personally. It's gonna be B tier because the stats are good, cool, great, but it's too expensive. Just get Knight's Vow, just get Zeke's, or just get Chains if you want an item that makes you even a bit more tanky. Chains is usually built with all these armor items anyways, so Thornmail is probably the best of the whole branch of tank items. I'm gonna put it into B. Pre-rework it would have been A, and I think it's still okay to build if you need the anti-heal. If you really need it. It gives a good amount of health, which is great for Rell's Crashdown Shield. That's definitely nothing to carve at. But I think all these tank items are B. Just because, in my opinion, Rell doesn't want to be a tank anymore these days. And that's what I'm gonna say about it. And after finishing that with Deadman's Plate, which is gonna be the only tank, in quotation, items that I want to put in A. Okay, I also changed this in here, but it's more because of it's cheap and its ability is really good in specific games. So Deadman's Plate is an odd one. I've built it like 4 or 5 times now, and I'm going. I know that sounds probably weird. I'm going to build it more because I want to play Rell with more focus on mount up flip engages. This one game from the last video, it probably sounds super weird for you guys, but it was so good and it was a challenge. I wanted to handicap myself, but it felt so useful. It was so good. And I know one game is not representative. It was a normal game as well, so probably the enemies weren't quite on the same elo range as I was. Even in my normal rank games, I see this working out just fine. I see it working out better than you going for Crashdown because there is less counterplay for the enemies. So, and Deadman's Blade just makes it really easy and more comfortable for you to stay in the unmounted form. I am gonna try building Deadman's Blade first, even in some games, when it's kind of hard because Shurela's is so good. But for example, at the moment my second most played support is Poppy, and I go Deadman's Blade a lot of games. Just because I play hyper aggressive and want to roam and want to annoy the enemies. Of course, of Poppy it's more viable because her passive auto attack benefits from it very well, and you can just, if you find an enemy in a bad situation, it's easier for Poppy to punish that than Rell, because Poppy just throws them against the wall, perma-CCs them with the ultimate, and if teammate is close by, that's usually a kill, can prevent them from dashing away with a W. On Poppy, it's probably S tier. On Rell, I want to keep it in A tier, not because of experience, but because of expectation, if you understand what I want to say here. And then let's get to the last item, which is Mikael's, and I just want to include it because it technically from stats is like these down here, but the active is actually something you can use from time to time. I don't want to say it's good. I'm not gonna put it in A, but if you need it, you need it. Mikael's is an item. If you need it, you need it, and when you use it correctly, it's gonna be great. But you don't need it in a lot of situations. I feel like high CC comps these days are mainly focused around knockbacks and knockups, like stuns and snares. The only champion where it might make sense is Ashe, because Ashe is the only champion that's like prevalent, that has a stun that matters, which is actually worth Mikaelsing. But in that case, your ADC uses cleanse anyways, your other champions can dodge it usually, tanks can just tank it. But Mikael's is, if you need it, you need it, and if you buy it in a good game, then just go for it. It will be useful. You will be able to use it. And since the rework, its stats are better on Rell. That as well, it gives a bit of tankiness. The mana regeneration, of course, is kind of meh, but and shielding and heal power. I mean, your W shield gets a bit empowered from it. It's alright, you know. It's alright. It's on the same par as these. I think that explains it good. All of these items are, all the B items are like, it's alright, you can build it, it's gonna do its thing. And then A is gonna be, this is really good, you build it in probably every game anyways, like not all of them, but some of these are always gonna appear in the game. And S is like, you build it every game, of course these are 2 mythics, so which one you prefer, of course. C is, it does things, but just don't do it, and F is, it does nothing for you. That's the explanation. Alright, I think this is gonna complete the list. If you have any questions about items I haven't mentioned yet, or I forgot to put in here, maybe I forgot something, I don't think I did. So Radiant Virtue is in here, and Echoes of Helia is also down here in F. I think I didn't forget anything that was or is relevant for Rell support. But if I forgot something, ask me in the comments. I'm gonna answer it gladly. Yeah, well, that's it gonna be for this video. And I'll see you all in the next one.